My name is Pamela Thornton. I am co-president of the League of Women Voters of Torrance area, serving Carson, Gardena, Harbor Gateway, Lomita, Harbor City, and the city of Torrance. So thank you for joining us with our Learn with the League speaker series, all about housing. And today, this is our second presentation, which is an educational opportunity to learn from a community advocate's perspective, how joining together with community engagement to be on the same page or not, we can come up with housing solutions. So today we are honored to be graced with the presence of Amber Sheikh, who is the Chief Impact Officer of Sheikh Impact, formerly known as Thurwell and Associates, where she leads an incredible team that works tenaciously toward raising capacity for organizations trying to solve the toughest issues and to assist our Los Angeles communities through organizational development, fundraising, and communications. Outside of her professional life, Amber is a very active community advocate. In January 2019, Amber was appointed to the City of Los Angeles Harbor Area Planning Commission by Mayor Eric Garcetti. She also coordinates the Council District 15 Working Group on Homelessness. She serves on the board of Social Justice Partners LA and on the advisory councils of Maternal Mental Health Now, and the Assistant League of San Pedro South Bay. So she is very active. I call her one of my sisters in the fight. I've known her for several years now when I was president of the Harbor Gateway North Neighborhood Council, and I've had called on her to support me. And I just want to shed the spotlight on a local person that's doing great things. So I will turn the floor over to you, but I wanted to kind of preface why I wanted to have this. So our League of Women Voters members kept expressing that they wanted us as a league to focus on housing. And so from speaking with them, I said, well, do you really know what it takes to put in a development? So our first discussion, we talked about it from a nonprofit developer perspective that's proposing permanent supportive housing. They're going to actually construct it. So from your perspective, tell me how what you do relates to the overall issues and how you came up with housing solutions. So I'll turn it over to you.
No, Pamela, those are great questions. And you all are so lucky to have Pamela in leadership with you because she's just an incredible leader. I've very much admired her for the many years, for the years we've worked together around this issue. So you've heard a little bit, it sounds like at the last education session you had about nonprofit housing, kind of how it's built, what goes into it. And I would say a fairly large component outside of the logistics of actually brick and mortar housing is paving the way for housing from a community standpoint. Because actually one of the most, anecdotally, factually I can say this, but one of the most expensive parts of building nonprofit housing is actually the process that one has to go through to build it. And a lot of that process is very mired in red tape and time consuming. And the more time we take doing things, the more the developments actually cost overall. Right. So one thing that I think we can do is, I think I speak to so many people all the time who want to help and find out, how can I help with this? I'm not building housing, but actually what we can do is rally around housing, educate ourselves around what works in our communities and help center the conversation on solutions, which is a word I use a lot because it's something that I feel like most people can agree on. There's a lot of conflict around how we should house people or who we should house or how that works and who we prioritize and all of that. But at the end of the day, I think all of us can agree that things need to change, that we need solutions, we need answers. And we need a diverse set of them, but at least we need solutions. So I really like using that word because it is action oriented, it's positive, and it gives everyone a sense of control a little bit around it as well, because everyone can contribute to a solution. So where I concentrate most of my time is in the community engagement piece around housing, making sure that we're paving the way for it, or making sure that we are hosting positive or action-oriented conversations about what's working and what's not, rather than just like, no, don't do it. Right? So it's just changing that into like something that was said to me a couple of years ago, actually on a podcast, and it stuck with me, is that through our working group, which Pamela has been part of, we changed the conversation from if we want to house folks and implement solutions to how. And it's just shifting that. So it's not allowing for a no, it's saying, okay, what's best for our community? How do we do it in a way that's best for our community? And hosting conversations. Yeah.
So you've been in the local news a lot the past 2 years, doing some great work. Yeah. So what I would like you to share is, how do you go from community engagement, community partnership, to wraparound services with those partners to provide the housing solution? So how is that structured, and how does it blend together to make a whole person whole?
Yeah. So there's two pieces to that, right? So there's the actual like programmatic, how it works when someone is housed. And then there's from kind of the advocacy piece, how it works to have effective advocacy. So I'll speak to the advocacy piece first, because it's been such a fascinating study. So a little background on me, even though I do nonprofit work from a consulting standpoint and work with many different kinds of nonprofits, from healthcare to housing to justice reform. My career started out in homeless services, doing that in-house. So I started out working on Skid Row, I want to say 15 or 17 years ago. And I worked for two prominent homeless service agencies. And that's where I really got my start in the nonprofit world. And that was before homelessness had become something that was so part of the public consciousness in the way it is today. That's when it was Skid Row, and that was it. It was kind of tucked over there, and it wasn't as pervasive as we see it, where it's in every neighborhood now. So it was really fascinating to be part of building and developing some of the first permanent supportive housing in Los Angeles, and knowing that this is something that works. And I remember back then we tour donors around, and they're like, wait, they can just stay here? And I worked at the Downtown Women's Center, which was for women. And they're like, okay, well, how long do they get to stay? And it's like, oh, no, forever if they need it. And the concept was just so foreign, but at the same time, we saw success. Housing folks that maybe wouldn't be able to be housed in a different circumstance. And we saw them thrive and heal and be able to have stable lives. But from the advocacy perspective, it's really hard to bring all those pieces together. And through the working group, I remember actually when the mayor told me it was the first time he'd seen something like that, where it was started, as Pamela knows, on the neighborhood council level. It was the first time that all of our neighborhood councils in a council district came together around an issue, which in my opinion seems silly that never happened before. But it was. So it first started with all us as neighborhood council leaders saying, well, if we want to talk about this and get the right information and bring information to our constituents, we're going to need to know what's going on. And the way to do that is through collective impact. Because instead of 8 neighborhood councils calling our council member, calling the supervisors, doing all these things, we said, no, we're going to have a meeting once a month, twice a month was when we first started. and we're going to get a representative to come to us and give us the updates. And then from there, we're going to go and educate our various stakeholders. And very quickly, we realized how many different entities didn't have this information either. Because I remember like churches and the local temple saying, hey, can we come to the meeting too? And I'm like, sure. And they were like, well, we don't have any of this information. No one talks to us about it. We need it.
Correct.
We're doing this work. So then they came. And then even the community-based organizations that were actually working in homeless services were like, can we come to the meeting? Because even though we do this every day, we have no idea. We don't have a lot of touch with the policy level in a, everyday way. And people ask us all the time, like, what's going on? So then they started coming to the meeting. And then the other elected offices started coming to the meeting, like our supervisor's office and our mayor's office and our local assembly office. And it really just started with having a place at a set time. We used to meet twice a month during the first year. And this was, I guess, 4 years ago now. And now we just meet once a month. And it's just a one-stop shop of, we get different elected officials to come. We always have an update from a senior staff member in our council district. And we go through it and we have the conversations and we ask the questions that we feel like need to be answered, or at least the answers should be out there. And one of the most helpful parts of it is like, we all hear the same thing. So there's a sense also of responsibility there that we can also cross-check each other. So that's not like 18 different people called the council office and talked to some staff member and then have 18 different stories about what happened. So it's about streamlining information, which seems sometimes, Pamela, I know you probably feel this way in leadership too. Sometimes I feel like I'm not doing anything actually. And then I'll hear stories where if not for that kind of clear information or that kind of education, we wouldn't be where we are. And quickly speaking to that, we've been wildly successful. I still sometimes try to wrap my head around it. When we started this work, it was also at a time where this work was starting, but I feel like we paved the way in the community to make it possible. We started out this work. There was 2 small temporary shelters in Wilmington. But if you were an individual experiencing homelessness in our region, which was Harbor City, San Pedro, Wilmington, and some areas of Watts, Watts had a few more housing, affordable housing developments. But if you were in Harbor City, Wilmington, and San Pedro, there were like maybe 2-3 dozen spots for an adult individual experiencing homelessness. And I always use San Pedro as an example because it is a large area of the council district. There was not a single shelter bed for an individual experiencing homelessness. And at that count, I think we had about 600 individuals that were homeless. So if you were homeless in San Pedro or Harbor City or some of these areas, you had to go up to Inglewood, and there were only, I want to say, 60 or 80 shelter beds for all of the South Bay. So it wasn't like you got to go up there. I mean, we were just so under-resourced. So even if you wanted to go inside, there was just not an option.
Right.
So now we see 4 years later, we have, in the council district, we have 4 new temporary housing developments, which altogether are 320 beds. We have Project Home Key, which is motel conversions, Project Room Key, which was the motel conversions during the pandemic, which opened up hundreds of spots. We have safe parking. We have multiple safe parking developments, which are essentially where people sleep in their cars and can go a safe place during the night, get some services as well. We have rapid rehousing, which are vouchers that when people first become homeless, it tries to get them out of homelessness as soon as possible. And we have, I want to say at the last count, it was 13 or 14. Now I'm forgetting off the top of my head. I have my notes here. We have, I'm going to give you the actual number because it's that impressive. We went from zero to 13 projects of permanent supportive housing. And we also have 4 projects of affordable housing. So altogether, when you look at these solutions, it's close to 1,000 temporary beds or units or places people can go, and close to 1,200 permanent ones where we had 0 before.
And that's excellent as far as the statistics.
Yeah, it's not enough.
It's not right.
It's not enough. And I
Right.
get so afraid of that folks are like, oh, success, done, and not done. And
Right.
also having the temporary housing, I think there's this idea of out of sight, out of mind. But unless there's actually permanent housing, there's no pipeline for people to go to.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. Right. So, couple of things that I think it'll be interesting to share. So you spearheaded the whole concept of the CD15 working group.
Yeah.
So how did you think to do that?
Frustration was how I thought to do it, to be honest. I remember, so this is how it happened. I went to the homeless count that year, which I want to say was 2018, probably then. And in my car, I'd worked in homeless services. I had always been somewhat involved, even as I became a consultant. We've always had clients in homeless services. And I remember thinking, so I live in San Pedro, and I've never done work really in San Pedro up until this point, because I remember seeing some of the stuff that went on and folks really rejecting a lot of these solutions. And I was like, you know what? These aren't my people. I'm still going to do the work I do in Metro LA and in Long Beach. And then I go home to San Pedro and I just don't worry about it. And I got so frustrated. And I'm in this car with folks doing a homeless count. And I'm kind of asking, and they're all neighborhood council folks. Like, how does it work? Like, you have like a quasi hyper local elected, you're elected officials. Like, what information do you get? How much power do you have? And when I started to poke into this, I realized that could be leveraged. Well, that should be leveraged. And then in March of that year, Mayor Garcetti came out with Executive Directive 24, which was bridge housing. And it was saying that, you know, we got to solve this crisis. And in the meantime, while we're waiting for permanent supportive housing to be built, the big housing, the final housing to be built, we need to get people inside and housing ready. So he said, all 15 council districts, you need to come up with a site where we can put a temporary housing facility, a shelter essentially. And after that came out, I remember working with my local neighborhood councils and saying, have we heard anything? You know, where's ours going to be? And we started talking to the other neighborhood councils. Has anyone heard anything? Are we going to do it? Are we going to sign on down here? And nobody knew anything. And that's really where, out of frustration, I'm like, look, we can't get any answers unless we all band together. This is the only way to get a good answer, because technically, if all 8 neighborhood councils come together, you represent every single voter in the district, whether or not they're aware of it. As an elected body, you do.
Correct.
So
that's where it came from.
That's where it came from. That frustration. Yeah.
Pretty impressive. Pretty impressive, because that's the model, I think, for a lot of people that are talking about it, about solutions, but solo to get to the solution is very difficult.
It's so difficult. And honestly, there were times it was really frustrating, especially at the beginning. I felt like I was dealing with a population or a community that just didn't want it. They didn't want solutions. There was a lot of, I'm sure you were in some of these meetings. Some of the meetings got really negative and really heated. And it took a lot of us just keeping our cool and making sure that everyone still had a voice. Because that was the problem. As soon as we shut someone down who maybe didn't agree with us, the magic was lost of having an open forum where technically everyone could be invited. It wasn't like, we didn't actually want to create an echo chamber where we all say like, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you. It had to become something where people could actually have dialogue in a healthy and sometimes not nice, but in a healthy way. And actually, I remember thinking it was the first year we had a little bit of a holiday party in December, I remember. And one of the working group members came up to me and told me that this was such a really amazing experience for her. And I said, great, I hope it's a great experience for everyone. And she said, you know, I've never been able to sit at the table like that with, you know, other advocates, but also the mayor's rep and this elected official and senior staff from this and the, you know, senior staff from different nonprofits. Like, we're all sitting and we're talking and dialogue. And I was like, well, of course, that's what we want. She's like, you know, I was homeless. And I said, I didn't know that actually. And she said, yeah, no, this is why I'm here, is this is my way to give back, but also to ensure I don't slip back in a way. Me becoming an advocate now changes my identity from being a formerly homeless person.
Right.
And it was so interesting as I had more and more personal conversations with people in the group. I think at some count, because I'd had so many one-on-one conversations with folks, I looked around the room, we had a meeting. The meetings always went anywhere between 20 people and 100 people. It's always this huge, but a fifth of the room I could say had talked to me about their lived experience with homelessness.
Right.
It's just such a really incredible thing to think of that. Anyway.
So that's awesome. So share with us your feeling once you see a project, that day of groundbreaking or the ribbon cutting ceremony, and you get to walk through the finished product, the finished development project. How does that feel?
Oh, that never gets old. Because it's this concept that people are going home. And so I do, the kind of policy advocacy work, but I also spend a lot of time at our local encampments. I have what I would call my crew. I advocate personally for usually, I have 3 to 5 people at any given time. They've been the same people for many years, but they're folks that I personally advocate for as well. And I know a lot of folks out there do this informally. You get to know someone, you get to know their story. And in a lot of way, your advocacy work goes through the lens of those folks' stories. And of course, I think of them because it's so tough out there, and it's so much tougher than any of us can imagine until you kind of walk with someone.
Right.
It is so complicated and complex and inaccessible to get housed in so many ways. And we have all these great resources, and we're housing more people than we've ever housed in this region. I think, the latest stat for City of Los Angeles is every day 130 people become housed, every day 150 people become homeless. It's just a fire hose that we can't keep up with. And I think in LA County, the numbers are similar. I think it's something like 250, 225, something like that. But that's what you're dealing with, is like, we're housing more folks than we've ever housed. It's just the supply and demand are not matching up. But when you actually go through the human side of the story, you see that, folks are missing case management meetings because they don't have a phone, because it's the pandemic. They don't have a place to charge their phone if they do have a phone. They, they went through a sweep recently, and everyone has mixed feelings about those. We need them, we don't need them. Both sides of that are true. But like, maybe they lost their items, or I know so many folks that within the first week or two of becoming homeless, everything was stolen, which means their IDs. You can't even get in line for a voucher for Section 8 until you have your ID back. You know how long it takes to get an ID again? All of those things, and every single setback, those are days, those are real days. I think about that sometimes. Like, I actually think about that when I have quiet times where I'm like waiting at the DMV or waiting for something. And I'm like, this is the representative of someone who is homeless and waiting for their next week's case management appointment, but they know they have a week before anyone will come help them again in a way.
Right.
So what do you do? It's those real time. So anyway, so when I walk through housing developments, I think of that. I think of myself. I think of the people that I work with, and each spot is an opportunity for someone to come home for good.
Right. So do you have a specific, maybe, success story that you can share?
Yeah, actually, I have one recently. Okay. I also have a lot of stories where I'm like, we're almost there, and it never really quite. But there's a woman that I'd worked with down at our Lamita McCoy encampment. So that's in basically Harbor City. And that was the largest encampment in our council district for a long time. A lot of folks know it because it was right on Lamita Boulevard and then back on this dirt road. And it's been there for, I'd say, 6 to 8 years, kind of growing. Now it's shrunk a lot. And there was a woman there who I met maybe 3-4 years ago, who was pretty newly homeless at the time. And she was part of this team actually that they tried to have for a while. Cause I don't know if most people know. So case manager. So let's say you're homeless, you get assigned a case manager. That case manager probably has close to 60 to 80 other cases.
Wow.
It's huge. And so you're dealing with a human like me, most likely working part-time as well, because case management does not really pay a living wage. So they need a second job or they're in school. And they're trying to get 60 to 80, maybe 50 at the lowest end folks, everything they need to get housed, working with how frustrated people are, working with some compounding version of trauma, substance abuse, mental illness, and some of those things only came after homelessness. I mean, I say this a lot as someone who has suffered through mental illness. I don't think I would last more than a week out there without resorting to some kind of substance, because it is way easier to get meth than it is to get Zoloft by far. And so she started this process, and at some point they had this pilot program called the ARCH team, where it took basically the highest acuity, which means the most complex, and to put crassly, the most likely to die on the street within a year, took the highest acuity folks and put them on these specialized teams where the caseload was 10 to 1. And that team eventually, unfortunately, fell apart because of burnout and all these other things. They had literally the toughest cases in the region. But she was part of that team at one point, and still, even with that 10 to 1, was not getting housed. It wasn't actually until the pandemic so that's 2-3 years after meeting her, that she had asthma, and I was able to help her get into Project Roomkey at the time, even though she wasn't technically old enough. She wasn't a senior, and it took a while for them to take her asthma as a chronic illness. But she eventually did get in, and she was for the first time inside sleeping in a bed, and she was able to stay in Project Roomkey for several months until they sunsetted the program. And the story will turn out good, don't worry. But they basically told her, she was actually born and raised in Lomita, went to school there, her family, her mom was still there. Her mom was dealing with some chronic stuff. I've met her mom multiple times, but also had a family that didn't have a safety net to help her. Like, everyone was right on the edge to begin with. So she eventually, Project Roomkey sunsetted, and the only place they could put her was in Lancaster. And she's like, I don't want to be in Lancaster. My family's not there. And on top of it, they didn't have the resources to get her to Lancaster. They just said, if you can get yourself to Lancaster by tomorrow, we can give you another shelter placement. And she was just so beat up by the whole idea of that she ended up back at the encampment. And I remember running into her, I was like, what are you doing here? And she kept her head down and got her Section 8 housing voucher. And she was housed 4 months ago. She's still in her apartment. And she's doing really well. She's having a hard time because the services aren't as wraparound as they used to be. So in some ways, she's so happy to be inside, but of course she could use more support. But I remember the moment that I felt like her story turned into a success story was I got a text from her, and she said, "Hey Amber, I'm ready to have you over for a beer."
Wow.
So I said, "Okay, what do you want me to bring?" And she goes, "No. You're coming. I'm buying the beer." I was like, well, what knows what kind of beer we're going to have. But I went over and we sat in her apartment and had a beer and just talked. And it was such a normal thing. And she's still there, but it was just one of those moments where I was like, I love that arc. And her story's not over.
Yeah, that's awesome.
For now, she's housed. She's over on Redondo Beach Boulevard in an apartment that I wish was nicer, honestly, given, how much that voucher is worth, but that's the system we're dealing with as well. But she's there. But it takes years. I wish it didn't. Oh, Pamela, I think you're on mute.
Yes, I have the fan on. It's a hot day. I wanted to find out, what is your recommendation to a person that has interest in giving back in some way, where they can start out giving back? Yeah. So how would you recommend someone take that first step?
So I get asked that a lot, right? And I always say I have a lot of coffees around that issue, like issue as an opportunity. And where I actually start with most people is, what are you good at? Like for you to give back, you have to take a really honest assessment of what your strengths are and you what you're naturally good at actually. Because the world doesn't change. Homelessness doesn't change if we all go to a soup kitchen.
Correct.
Homelessness changes if we all take our talents and strengths and plug it in. And it doesn't have to be in some overwhelming way. Like you don't need to go down in the encampment and be like, you and I are going to be best friends and we're going to do this.
Right.
Because also, if you're not consistent, think about all the inconsistent relationships that person has already had. Please don't do that to them. They're already so sick of people failing them and leaving them and turning over on them. But it's this idea that everyone has these talents and strengths, and it's how you can apply it to this. Like, for example, there was someone in the community recently that was like, I want to help and do these things. And I was like, okay, what do you do for a living? And she's like, well, I'm an art therapist and I actually was a hypnotherapist for a while and, do this kind of stuff. And I'm like, great. Our local shelter could really use some trauma informed writing sessions. Would you be willing to do something like that? So stuff like that where people can fit in. And I would also say, take some time to really look at your strengths. Find a group like ours, like the CD15 Working Group on Homelessness, or I would say even a faith-based community. There are organizations that are plugged in. You don't need to duplicate it. You don't need to start from scratch, but also have a little bit of tenacity around that. Because if you think about it, we're all volunteers. So, don't make it harder. Don't be like, I need to help. You need to tell me how to help. And I expect you to tell me next week how I can help. What I want you to do is say, okay, this is what I'm good at. These are the things that I have resources or strengths. And maybe it's, I make amazing cookies. And we're like, great, we do Saturday lunch delivery. You're on cookies, girl. It doesn't have to be huge. I mean, my kids help me with this, right? They're 4 and 6. Those kids have spent more time in churches getting care packages ready. And we don't go to church, but they spent more time in churches than anywhere else, or in encampments dropping off lunches. Or, my 6-year-old told me, man, Mom, you have a lot of homeless friends. I was like, well, I have a lot of friends at our house too, but okay. But it's just plugging in. And I actually really like having those conversations with people about hey, what are your strengths? Because it doesn't have to be the traditional volunteer thing. And for some folks, there is a bigger calling for you, and it doesn't need to be complicated. I really do believe in this peer advocacy model of and we're actually starting to pilot this in various areas of LA. If you're interested in helping out, come get trained on kind of how the system works and boundaries and trauma and things like that. And then either decide, you say, tap me in. I want to be someone's one-on-one. Or you say, wow, now I really, really understand the system. I want to be that peer advocate, the person who's the one-on-one. I want to be their supporter.
Right.
Which means I want to help resource them. Because if you think about it, for everyone, let's say like me, who's out there maybe, and we're doing some random stuff to help someone get housed with their IDs, it costs money. I'm here's $20 for this, here's $20 to cover that, or here's a motel room because we can't get a caseworker out on a weekend, but I know you're going to get into housing and I want to stabilize you. Or you just got into housing and you have PTSD and you have really loud housing because this is not the nicest complex. Let's get you a television so you can have the TV on all the time to drown out the sound. It's little things. It sounds silly, but behind every person who is homeless out there, there's hopefully someone trying to help them. And that person trying to help them also needs support.
Right. So one of the challenges I know when I served on the neighborhood council is actually having a person answer the phone with those referrals.
From the question too.
Yeah. Right. So how do we manage that? So have we gotten better is the question. So we have 211, we have 311, we have LASA. Yeah, we have all of those referral numbers, but anytime after 5 p.m., Monday through Friday, is out, and then definitely on the weekend. So have we done better as a community to provide services and a live body to pick up the phone if a person needs to call for help.
We're better. We're not as good as we could be.
And so what do we need to do as a community? So the League of Women Voters, so yes, we are very much engaged with our elected officials. Yes. So we're in the same community, so to speak. So how can we leverage our advocacy to be on the same page with this work? How can we do what we can do to help?
That's such a good question, because it's frustrating, and I know it. I mean, that's what, in a lot of ways, the working group was born out of. I mean, some pretty foul language if you heard what I was doing on the back end before I sent those emails, but I was really frustrated that we couldn't get answers or just engagement.
Right.
Now, that being said, it's also about managing relationships. Once you have those open lines, you all know it well. You have to be careful too, right? You want to make folks still want to answer the phone. A big thing for us was just relationships, honestly, forming those relationships. There's really nothing that can change, that makes up for that at the end of the day. And also helping. So instead of just going with questions or like, we need this, we need information on this, we need this, saying, hey, I see what you're doing out there and I see you're doing great work. We're here to help. If you can think of a way we can help, we have some ideas. Would these things be helpful to you? I actually have this at my desk, and it's for my staff really, but it says solutions, not problems.
Right.
Stop telling me about the problems. Just tell me about the solutions.
Right.
But I think that's part of it, is managing that as well. And there are collaborations to be had. There's so many people working on this in these silos. Like if you look at, I use faith-based organizations a lot because before we had a social service system, we had faith-based organizations that did this work. And they still do this work, but they actually are kind of outside of our social service system, which I think is a mistake.
Right.
Because they're on the front line doing this work for free a lot of the time with no resources and no communication in the system, right? So what we need is just more of that, is that collaboration and everyone being on the same page, and it's not like a zero-sum game. There's not like some information that if you have it, somebody can't have it. Like everyone should have it. Everyone should have it. I wish just more people had access to facts about this or an idea of how it worked, because it is complex and it feels really overwhelming.
Right. So I know that Harbor Interfaith and United Way have been great community partners. Yes. Are we still collaborating with them, or are there any more nonprofits that are on the horizon since the pandemic that are doing similar work that could also be a resource?
That's a really great, yeah. So Harbor Interfaith, because they're the lead for the South Bay and homelessness. So like they're like the organization that coordinates all the sub organizations in homelessness, are a really great organization at the end of the day to feel plugged in. Of course, not problem with them, but I feel for them. Their turnover is crazy. They are so understaffed right now. And this is a regional issue in homelessness. We are so understaffed. It's tremendous, actually. And the burnout, and how many caseworkers are they themselves on public benefits. So right. It's not a sustainable system in that sense. But so they're great. United Way has been great around the advocacy piece. They haven't been as active because their Everyone In campaign, which was their advocacy campaign, has kind of, they did a lot of great work, and I think they really forged the way for a lot of education, but I think they've kind of scaled back a little now that they have gone out there. But also an organization that I'm involved with that serves kind of a large swath of the harbor is the Harbor Neighborhood Relief Fund. So this was actually formed in the pandemic by a group of us from Harbor City, Wilmington, San Pedro. Honestly, it was started more in San Pedro just because we had a fiscal sponsor down here. And it actually started like the week of lockdown, where we had, all of a sudden, nobody was going to our homeless encampments because everyone was locked down. So that no one was seeing caseworkers, and a local faith-based leader and I went out to give out information one Saturday, and they're like, "What's going on?" Like literally, didn't know.
Wow.
They don't. I mean, they don't have like a television.
Exactly.
And most of them have their smartphones, but they keep them off because they're saving battery until they need them. So there was like some weird rumor mill, but like literally it was like, 2 days after we got like this, like this is happening. And I remember we were like, there's a pandemic, and because they're like, we're wearing masks and gloves. I mean, I think we were in like literally astronaut gear when we went out because we had no idea. And then we went out. So we circled around, and I'm sure Pamela, you got this email. I sent it out to everyone I knew, all the working group, everyone, and said, hey, I need flyers, the same CDC flyers we're all getting. We need those for our homeless individuals. We need masks. We need sanitizer. We need things. We need tents and tarps so everyone can shelter in place and not share tents out there. And that weekend we got this tremendous, like I got tents dropped off at my house all weekend long. We went out. It was I don't know if people remember, it also rained that week. It was very apocalyptic. So we had tarps out there. We had tents. We're giving out things. We're explaining what social distancing is for the first time. And out of that effort, this relief fund was born, because we thought, man, we are so impressed by the community. When we were like, we need it, people just came out.
Right.
So we said, okay, yes, we have a homeless population out there. And then throughout the whole pandemic, Pastor Lisa and I, that's the pastor, we did Saturday lunches where we coordinated with different groups so that every single Saturday at our 2 to 3 largest encampments, we provided lunch because there was all the service centers were closed. No one was handing out lunch. During the weekend, there was no food to be had. So we're just making sure that there was at least one meal. So long story short, we formed this relief fund in conjunction with the chamber, some other entities, as a fund to it ended up helping families to stay housed in the pandemic. So you applied, you told us what you needed, and we gave everyone that we deemed not a scam between $300 and $500.
Wow, wonderful.
Yeah, we asked them to tell us how they spent it. And it was, we have some amazing, we gave out several $100,000 over the pandemic this way. And now we're continuing the work because in a lot of ways we're trying to retool to actually support, like I said, our caseworkers are so underworked and underpaid. We're trying to figure out ways to support them now as like the biggest lever. Instead of supporting homeless individuals, let's actually support the support staff, lift them up so they can do their job better. But this organization has ended up being a connector because we had to work with all the service providers. We're going to be hopefully hiring a staff now to act as a connector so that there's less siloing. Anyway, I see a question.
This has just been fascinating. I'm sorry I missed the first 5 minutes.
No, you're good.
However, I'm with the Beach Cities League of Women Voters, and I also help out with the Manhattan Beach Safe, MB Safe.
Yeah.
So we're having a lunch tomorrow, a few of us, to figure out what we can do, hear what we've been doing, who we've been housing. So my idea was always something like what you're describing, this Harbor Neighborhood Relief Fund.
Yeah.
It sounds beautiful. It sounds like a great idea for families who are on the edge.
Yeah.
Or if they're homeless. I live in Manhattan Beach. What's it more expensive here than it is in anywhere else? Probably in the country, maybe equivalent of Westport, Connecticut, and Beverly Hills, California.
I was like you and Marin. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. So we got to be able to make some donations that make differences in people's lives.
And I have to say too, because I grew up in Palos Verdes. I'm a local South. I'm
okay.
Born and raised in the South Bay. I leveraged a lot of my relationships up there to get early donations because they're the folks I knew that had something to give, right?
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, you say you're together with the Chamber. Is that the Chamber of Commerce?
And it's a tremendous partnership that is very atypical. Our chamber down here is not, they're obviously business focused, but the way they spin it is quality of life is their focus. And economic stability is a huge part of that. But one of the reasons they come in is because they realize not until we solve this problem are we going to have our economy thriving the way it needs to be. So yeah.
I guess is if there's any way we can brainstorm with you a little bit once I meet with them tomorrow for lunch, I will let them know I've listened to your talk today. And perhaps we can meet and find out a little more about how you have your relief fund working. And
I'm
we could
very
either,
happy to share it.
you know, hook up with that or do our own or whatever.
It's a super scalable model. And in a lot of ways, so before I even worked in homelessness, I worked in microfinance, and I did research in India and microfinance on the power of small loans. But instead of loans, we do grants, right? Because we actually don't need it back.
Right.
But it's been, I mean, you'd think $500, that's for some people, that sounds like that's a really large donation to give, but it's a pivotal amount to make rent, or people have done really fascinating things with it. I know in the pandemic, we had parents who had special needs kids, and it was their main way of being able to still continue private resources for them when all the public resources kind of went away or were virtual, or gas to get to appointments. Or one of my favorite stories is we had a woman who got a grant. So it was 300, I think she was just an individual. And because she was out of a job, all of a sudden she got laid off being a pandemic. And then we got a donation from her 2 weeks later for $300. And she said, I got a job. So I wanted to give it back. And I know someone else it's going to be their bridge money.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like foster family. You know, it's like foster kids, you can foster a family. You can have someone else live well for a while so that, or get themselves settled. And then they can give back and, or go, pass it on. But there's got to be better ways for private citizens to be able to help.
And that's how I feel. There's ways that we can have some control and do things. I'll be honest, because I work in nonprofits and fundraising and philanthropy, right? So most of our service providers are really hamstringed by what they can do with their money, right? So Harbor Interfaith can't give a micro loan to cover someone's thing. They are only allowed to do certain things with their funding. But what we can do is if somebody says, hey, I need this XYZ random thing, like I need my tuition paid at my cosmetology school to make sure that I can get my certificate so I can go start working. And I have $220 to pay it off. I just don't have $220. Great, we'll pay that. We'll pay it. It's fine. So it's hyper flexible and very human as well. And I think that's actually what takes the most time is to get to know the stories and give folks support. Because it's not just like, here's some money. We also gave resources like, here's some money for this. It sounds like you're having some other issues. Here's a food bank where you can get food every single day of the week somewhere within a drivable radius of your house. So let's empower you this way too. But also at the end of the day, I really believe that everyone is the expert in their own life. And we don't need to be super prescriptive too. Like, we're only going to give you $100 if you do this one thing that we think you should do with it. It's like, no, I trust you. To do the right thing with your $100.
No, I think we can, this is doable. This is doable.
It's powerful. Because one thing that we loved about it too is so many folks, we went out and we just would give them, we do it via Visa gift card usually. And number one, they didn't believe it. They were like, what is this real? And we're like, yeah, it's real. And they're like, where's the money from? And so we say, your neighbors. And they're like, no, it's not. And I'm like, really, it is. Literally, there's a zero pass through. We take nothing off the top. It's just your neighbors care about you. That's it.
Yeah. The League of Women Voters in the beach cities, we've collected, food for project needs out of St. Paul's Church in Redondo Beach. So, we're really, and have a terrific committee for helping the homeless issues and trying to figure it out. And MB Safe is another organization with us that, not with us, but who want to see if we can somehow combine our causes and make something happen.
Please do that. That's all I can say too, is I was speaking to Anglican. What's Anglican here?
Like Episcopal?
Thank you. I was like, I'm sorry, my mom's from England. So I'm like, it's Anglican there. What is it? Episcopal here, Episcopalian. With their leader, the Hermosa Beach Church I met with recently, and they're trying to figure out what they can do, right? They're like, what can we do? And I love that they were like, we know there's things we do to make us feel better, but what is actually needed? Like we can make sandwiches and we feel like we did something great. Do we need sandwiches? So I really like when folks ask that question. Something we did recently through the relief fund is I got really sick of hearing, well, they're not going to do this. Or like, people would be like, oh, we're going to put up this housing. Oh no, but the homeless people aren't going to take that. I'm like, why don't we go ask them? So we did a street-based needs assessment, and it was a Saturday. And we did it in a way that I tried to be very intentional, where folks who had already been working at those encampments as volunteers or advocates or a church, they're the ones that went out to ask the questions. So it wasn't like, hi, we're random. You don't even know who I am. There was some familiarity. Everyone got it. It's not much, but a $5 gift card because we're thanking them for their time. And we kept it really short and to the point where we could crunch data off of it. And it was literally like the questions were like, what do you actually need while you're out here? That was an open-ended. Like people drop off all kinds of things. What do you actually need that you're not getting? And then the next one was we had various types of housing that were in the pipeline, like a shelter, project room key, motel conversion, safe parking. We didn't do permanent supportive housing because we know most people would take permanent housing, but we kind of listed all the other solutions and we're like, tell us why you haven't taken it or why you would. Yeah. Just so we could get that data. The third question was essentially, who's your caseworker and how does that work? And there was some really great feedback there. And then the last question we asked, because we're trying to assess whether or not this is a good program, we said, if there was someone like me who came out and just worked with you, not a caseworker, someone that didn't get paid, would you want to have a support person like that? 100% said yes. That they would love to have someone to connect with and who cared about them, who may not be able to get them everything they need, but just checked on them.
A good friend. Like a friend.
We call that like as we're like creating a pilot for this, I'm also working for work on creating a pilot for this up at the VA in Westwood. That's something on my plate right now. And we're coming up with like how this works. And it's like, it's just you're taking on a new friend. That's not like something more formal or weird than that, actually.
Great.
Anyway, I could talk about this forever. So I want to make sure I get to questions. Ryan, I see your question about elected state county leaders who I admire. I'll be honest, I admire a lot of our elected officials' staff. I am of the mind that honestly, I care about who's in office. Obviously, I'm very involved with that. But at the end of the day, my biggest worry is that politicians surround themselves with great counsel. And I am much more, which is sad because we don't get to elect their council or their staff, but we have to trust them. And I wish more people would ask questions about who's going to be on your staff if elected. Who are you going to surround yourself with? Because at the end of the day, those are the folks doing all the work. And those are the folks we all have to work with, or we do get to work with, to make sure the work's being done right. Because no one human can change policy, but the relationships do, I think. And so I admire a lot of staff, and I admire politicians that surround themselves with people that are smarter than them. That's what I do at work. Like my whole staff is like way smarter than me and amazing, super talented in all these other ways. That's how you make it work.
That's a great answer. Are there any more questions? So I think you answered it too. So my question that I have for you, we have a few minutes left. How can the neighborhood council, no. How can the League of Women Voters help with voter education, voter registration? That's a huge population of people that may not be participating in our democratic process. So do you have any suggestions of how the League can help in that way? Because that is our number one advocacy, right? So how can we lend our strength, our numbers collectively to help?
Yeah, I would say be a mailing address.
Be a mailing address, okay.
That's one of the biggest hurdles to being able to be a voter. So I don't share this a lot, but I'm not ashamed of it. The folks that I advocate for, a lot of them technically live at my house. Like,
Okay.
if you their license, which I'm sure there's all kinds of risk to that. Don't tell my parents that, please. But like, you know, especially the ones that I'm closest to, they live at my house. I mean, they've never been to my house, but that's their address and I let them use it. So, and I think that about some nonprofits will allow them to use their address. So if you hosted a mailing address for folks and we're able to let them register at your address, get their mail-in ballots at your address, and have that relation, like as in close that loop. Say, we're going to come out and we're going to do a drive, and on this day we're going to start going out and giving them back again, or here's the number to get your, I mean, it's breaking down those barriers, because it's just that it's one of the most basic things is not having a mailing address.
Yes, that's a good point. Do we have any of the service providers in the South Bay that allow one to use the address for mail and the purposes of having a physical address for mail to be delivered for their business, right?
Yeah, I think Harbor Interfaith does it if you're a resident. I know when we opened the bridge housing here in San Pedro, one of the first question I was so honored I got to do intake for the first resident, and he was like, "Can I get magazines?" And they were like, "Oh, well," and the mailbox is really small there for 100 residents. So I don't really know how we're going to do that, but we're going to figure that out. Because he was like, "Well, a home equals magazines for me."
Right.
So some do. I knew when I worked at the Downtown Women's Center, now this was a long time ago, that was the resident's address, and anyone who came to that day center, because they knew they came in every day. The problem is when folks are getting moved around, right? So it's almost like there needs to be some external cog. Or I would say have voter drives at permanent supportive housing complexes or affordable housing complexes where that's their home, actually, like forever until they move or don't need it, or, you know, maybe do something very nefarious. I'm not really sure exactly all the rules, but that's one of the ways that folks can break that down. Like Salvation Army, the one at Lamita McCoy, there's like a little service station there. They're the mailing address. I don't know if they're still working in the pandemic, but traditionally they were the mailing address for a lot of folks in that encampment.
That's a great recommendation. Thank you.
Yeah.
So last question from Ryan. He had a 4 o'clock, so I think he had to jump off. But you see that there? He has recommendations.
Which journalist should we be reading?
Yeah.
I read it all because I take it all in. I read the LA Times every single day. I read the Daily Breeze a lot of the time. I try not to read too much on Facebook or social media or anything else because it becomes an echo chamber. And I know the algorithm is fixed to my own beliefs. You know, in a lot of ways, I'm friends with a lot of my folks. But I do try to listen to a lot of it. So I don't get a lot of my, I guess you could say, news in some ways or opinions from journalism. I end up talking to a lot of people. I spend a lot of time in rooms with people that are very different than me. But and my social media presence, like I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and most of it's like cute pictures and some cool stuff I'm doing through work, and here and there some really good feel good stuff around our homeless crisis. But there's some stuff. I wouldn't say this too publicly, but there are also sites, groups out there that are homeless advocates that I think are actually not helping our cause through their journalism and through their it's overblown and I think not strategic. So I'm a very big believer, and I get lots of criticism for this, and I'm fine to take it, that I don't think we can solve this without working with our system. I believe that we just throw it out, shake our fist at the system, and hope for the best. Like, anarchy is not my answer. I believe that, especially not anytime soon, right? We have to work with our system to change our system, I believe. Now, do I wish it was faster? Hell yeah. Like, we still need to do that. So I know that I get criticized for being moderate, or knowing that to get things done, it cannot just be black and white. Like, for example, our sweeps, which are encampment cleanups. It's something that's necessary, I think, for public health. But one of the other reasons I think it's necessary, even though I don't think it's necessarily humane, and I don't love it for my folks out there, is because I'm not just advocating for unhoused folks. I feel like I'm advocating for our entire community. And if we don't also listen to the needs and keep our promises to our housed community, we'll lose our chances to do the really big stuff that's the actual solution. So
Right.
I'm sure out there's some video of me yelling at someone about this, but folks that are protesting something that's happening that day, when I'm saying, do not come down to our area from, North LA to make a point, when we've been doing this work for years, and
Right.
I need to make sure everyone in our community trusts us as advocates and knows that we're trying to find something that works for the majority most of the time. And sometimes our housed community is going to be uncomfortable, but I also need to show them that we're willing to make concessions so that everyone has room in this.
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, that makes sense. I understand that. So the time now is 4:03. So I want to be respectful of your time, but it's been a pleasure having you here with us today. And I knew that you would be the perfect person to speak with about your advocacy work and how you've made some positive change. I see the different things in your post, Woman of the Year, and your appointment to the Harbor Area Planning Commission. I was like, look at it.
I mean, a lot. That's
your-
all because people wanted this, though. Like,
Yes.
I say this a lot. I could just be a really nasty, angry woman sitting on my couch drinking too much wine, complaining about this all. There were enough of us to want to do that. It's only because people showed up and wanted
Yes.
change. So
Right.
that's really what it is. It's just I created a space. Everyone filled the
Yes.
space.
Right. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And you can probably join again and have another conversation, because
If there's
this is
any
just
questions,
this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, you have so much to offer and to share in your work and your professional work. So I really want to leverage knowing you to help the league. And we've talked about that before. So I will be reaching out to you to see.
I'm so happy to be here in all the
that.
ways.
Yeah.
And I'm here to leverage your all strengths too, because we all have work to do and we all have a piece in it. And I really believe that that's not just lip service. So I sometimes feel like my biggest contribution is lighting fires under other people.
Well, that's how you get it done. That's how you get things done, right?
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me today. If questions come across, Pamela, don't hesitate to forward them or forward my email to people. Happy to help.
Okay, thank you so much. And so tomorrow we
have
Dr. Richard Green, who is the chair of the USC Lusk Center for Real Estate. He is an economist, and we're going to talk about the socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19 and how that leads to homelessness specifically. And Dr. Green has done some great interviews talking about people leaving the state and what states are they going to. So we're going to talk about it from that perspective. Dr. Green is renowned. He worked for the Obama administration. He's often highlighted on the news and on news radio here locally.